All right. Hey there. Sorry for the late start. Just, went on a run with Nicole, tried to grab a shower, and couldn't find my toothbrush. So anyway, had a late start getting here, but figured I'd just get my stuff done and come here to be with you guys. We're in Numbers chapter 15 today, finally. Six days in chapter 14. But not going to spend nearly as much time in chapter 15. So it starts off with laws of grain and drink offerings. And this would parallel Leviticus chapters 1 through 7. Those were animal offerings as well. But it's recapping some stuff, giving extra details on stuff. And so, it says, when you have come into the land. Notice this now. When you have come into the land. So he just told the 20 and over crowd, right, that they're not going to enter the land. But now he goes and says, obviously, to the people who will be there or be able to go with the under 20 crowd, all right, when you go in the land, here's something you're going to do in the land. And it talks about, if you have a burnt offering or a sacrifice, right, for your appointed feasts to make a sweet aroma to the Lord from the herd of the flock. And it talks about the grain and the wine and the things. Well, they're not going to have a lot of grain and wine while they're in the wilderness. So that's why when you come into the land and you have grain and wine and you give back to God part of what he's providing for you in the promised land, here's how you go ahead and are going to do that. And so he talks about a peace offering in verse 8, a drink offering in verse 10. And then down in verse 14, as a reminder, our morning live stream, I'm not going verse by verse as we did as a church when we went through Numbers, but he says, if a stranger dwells with you, or whoever is among you throughout your generations and would present an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord, just as you do, so shall he do. One ordinance shall be for you of the assembly and for the stranger who dwells with you, an ordinance forever throughout your generations, as you are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law and one custom shall be for you and for the stranger who dwells with you. Oddly, I've seen people take this passage and try and apply it essentially to the New Testament and to the Gentile believer, that we need to follow the Jewish laws and become Jewish, because here's where it talks about how there'll be one law and one custom for the strangers. And we're the strangers, so we're the ones who, you need to understand there's a context here. And the context is the Old Testament. The context is the nation of Israel. And the context is the Mosaic Levitical sacrificial system. Notice it says, when a stranger dwells among you, wants to make would present an offering. Where am I looking here? I lost it. Made by fire in verse 14. That's what I was looking for. An offering made by fire. This is an offering going on to the altar there at the tabernacle, later the temple. And so here's part of it. Is in the year 300 and something odd BC. I think I've got that right. 333. Past ones. Yeah. Well, regardless. Alexander the Great. I'm sure you all know the dates of his reign, but when Alexander the Great came down to Jerusalem, and Jason the high priest was supposed to have come out to him and shown him in the prophecies of Daniel his coming. Alexander decided to spare the city and whatnot, and he asked that offerings be made for him. Now, when the offerings were made on behalf of Alexander the Great, they followed these rules, because the stranger who desires to bring an offering to the Lord, he's not going to do it in some pagan way. It doesn't matter if in his culture they can sacrifice a pig. You can't do that. It doesn't matter if in the stranger's culture they do something different. If you're going to come here and worship the Lord, you're going to do it this way. One law and one custom shall be for you and for the stranger who dwells with you. Now, what's fascinating is if I back up, in fact, are we going to get there? Or is it coming up? It's in the next chapter? No. If I back up, I believe it's in Exodus. sometimes these things get covered in more than one place and forget, you know, is this point mentioned in this one or in that one? But in Exodus chapter 12, I'm going to see if it mentions the stranger, because I don't think it actually mentions the stranger yet. Maybe it does. Strike the lamb. Okay, yeah. So I don't think it's actually in Exodus. It might actually be, oh, who knows? The Lord's Passover. 1 second. See, this is why I don't know all this stuff all the top of my head. Your lamb. 4th day you should kill it. Ah, it is the Lord's Passover, verse 11. Not there either. Deuteronomy 16. One last check and I'll see. The Passover reviewed. Ah, yes. So Deuteronomy 16. Oh, and I have written here. So it's in Numbers 28, Leviticus 23, Exodus 12. So Exodus 12, Leviticus 23, Numbers 28, and Deuteronomy 16. All places that the Passover is mentioned. And it's only really briefly mentioned in Deuteronomy. So then Numbers 28, I said? Numbers 28. I'm going to find this, guys. Don't worry. This is kind of an important thing, though. The Passover. Nope, not there. So Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23, I think, is actually one of the best as far as chapters on, like, the Lord's feasts. I think that's just one of the best chapters that gets it all covered. But of course, it's not there. Well, I'll be bamboozled. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to figure out where that is. We'll look it up later. But I believe it's the Passover. Now I'm just saying I believe it because I'm having a hard time finding it. But the Passover where only a circumcised person, an actual convert, was allowed to do the Passover feast. Or maybe it's something else. Now my brain's hurting over this. I'm going to have to go back and I'll post it in the comments after I'm done with this. But the one law and one custom. So Gentiles could offer sacrifices without converting. We see Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. He was considered one of the God-fearers. Whenever Paul would preach in the synagogue in the book of Acts, you'll note that there were Gentiles there. They weren't converts. And what they would have is, an inner area where the Jewish men were allowed to be. But then there were outer or upper tiered areas in these synagogues where the women and children, as well as Gentiles, were allowed to be. I don't have the exact layout of the ancient synagogue all mapped out, but if you look at the temple, there was the court of the priests, only the priests could go. There was the court of the men, where Jewish men could go, and then the court of the women, where Jewish women and children could go. And then beyond that was the court of the Gentiles. So it's kind of the same thing in a synagogue system. I don't know, again, depending on the size of the synagogue, if they'd mix the Gentiles and women or they'd be separate, I don't know. But Gentiles would come. And Gentiles could offer up offerings. The main key was it had to be done God's way. You didn't just get to worship God however you want. And it talks about the heave offering in 17 to 21. And rather than go on, I just got to finish there. We'll finish here today. And we'll get into this whole, the unintentional and presumptuous sins coming up in the next, on Monday, as we continue on, maybe wrap the chapter up, do the first half today. But this kind of goes back to, again, that all things being done decently and in an orderly manner, that God is a God of order and that he does have ways he wants things done. And it's fascinating, just this morning, not even knowing that this would be my text, I had almost thought about writing a Facebook post just about how God permits things to be disorderly. You see, at the church at Corinth, there were spiritual gifts and things going on that Paul had to write to them about and say that you should not be doing it this way. But the spiritual gifts were there, and obviously God was enabling them because only God can do that. And so it makes you wonder, well, why would God even enable the people to exercise these spiritual gifts if it wasn't the way he wanted it done? Well, God is very gracious. And I think God allows us to do things wrong, but desires us to do it right. Sometimes you let your kids do things the hard way, even though you give them clear instructions on what you really wanted them to do. And so this chapter is just talking about, even with the old Levitical system of sacrifice and worship, that there was a way it was supposed to be done. And God clearly explained there's one law and one custom. And if down the road they started letting different people do it in different ways, it's like that. Well, God told them how to do it. And there probably would have been consequences for doing it the wrong way. But again, God seems to sometimes let us wander and stray a bit. He allows us to not do things the way. And again, allow is not permission. Well, I say permits. Obviously, he could snap his fingers and everything would disappear. So in some sense, he allows it, but he doesn't desire it. And just because it happens doesn't mean he's condoning it, right? It's just, God is a very gracious God. And so there we go. Numbers 15, 1 through 21-ish. On Monday, we will tackle 22 through 41. All righty. You guys have a great weekend, and I will see many of you guys on Sunday morning. God bless you.